On behalf of Washington University in St. Louis,
The Ohio State University,
Bloomberg Philanthropies,
HBCU Climate Change Consortium,
the City of St. Louis,
City of Columbia, Missouri,
Second Nature,
the College of Menominee Nation,
University of Wisconsin in Madison,
the University of Michigan,
USDN, Urban Sustainability Directors Network,
the University of Minnesota,
Indiana University.
Welcome to the Midwest Climate Summit. For more than a century, the Midwest has fed our nation and manufactured our goods,
leading to unprecedented growth and prosperity. But today, we face a great challenge.
The Midwest is already feeling the impacts of a changing climate. We are experiencing increased seasonal flooding, droughts, and heat waves.
And we're seeing a greater number of extreme weather events. All of this puts lives at risk, and it destroys crops, it strains infrastructure, and it burdens the economy.
We invite you to participate in the Midwest Climate Summit today and in the months ahead,
as we come together to develop a coordinated Midwest response to the climate crisis.
The next decade is critical to avoid the worst impacts of a changing climate.
And the Midwest is uniquely positioned to develop solutions given our strengths across many sectors.
In fact, our leadership will create jobs, improve health, make our communities more resilient to natural disasters, protect our cherished natural resources,
and position the Midwest to attract top talent and major employers in the coming years.
This work can be done and must be done in a manner that creates opportunities for all of our communities, rural, suburban, and urban.
especially those that have been left behind even as the overall economy has expanded.
This critical work is going to require leadership from all sectors and all communities throughout the Midwest.
Thank you for joining us. We are energized by the talent and the expertise that is coming together, and we look forward to the great things we will accomplish for our future. Now, let's get started.
Now let's get started.
Good morning, and welcome to the fourth session of the Midwest Climate Summit Think Tank Series. It's wonderful to have everyone with us today. We're coming together today as a nation and the world eagerly awaits the final results from the election. Regardless of who wins, we can be assured that roughly half of voters will be disappointed, if not deeply concerned. This week has only further reinforced the critical importance of our work to develop nonpartisan discussions and collaborations around climate impacts and solutions for the Midwest states, cities, and neighborhoods where we live, work, play, and worship. By coming together around our shared values and our shared home, we have the potential to advance solutions that will make the Midwest more resilient, bring investment and jobs to our communities, and improve our health. I hope you'll join us in doubling down on our commitment to foster nonpartisan discussions and place-based solutions. We have an incredible program today that begins with a keynote on education for resilience, letting Mother Earth teach us, featuring Professor Daniel Wildcat. Following Professor Wildcat's keynote, we again have 4 concurrent workshops, each featuring a phenomenal group of leaders and experts. If you haven't signed up for the workshops and you would like to participate, you can join any of the workshops today. The workshop topics are listed on the event details page on the Midwest Climate Summit website, and the speakers are listed on the speakers lineup page. As I've done before, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the steering committee organizations and individuals who have contributed a tremendous amount of time and expertise to make the Midwest Climate Summit possible. I've been part of many collaborative projects in my career, and I can say without a doubt that the partnership between the 20+ organizations and over 50 individuals that helped develop this fall series has been truly remarkable. The group has been extremely generous, investing their time and expertise. You can visit the website to learn more about the partner organizations and the planning committee members. And I also want to thank Bloomberg Philanthropies for their generous support that made this fall series possible. The content throughout the Midwest Climate Summit Think Tank series has been developed with a specific eye towards building new and enduring partnerships throughout the Midwest and advancing a set of objectives for each of the 4 workshop tracks that you can learn more about on the mission page of the website. I share this each week to keep us focused on the vision and purpose that brought us together and that will propel us through the months ahead. We're grateful to all of you for so actively participating in the series. Your engagement, your perspective, and your expertise are truly invaluable, whether you attend some of the sessions or you attend all of the sessions. We truly want this series to be an on-ramp for additional individuals and organizations to join our Midwest Climate Collaborative to develop a more coordinated Midwestern response to the climate crisis. So please help us spread the word about this series by sharing it through your networks. And now all 3 of the preceding plenary sessions are available on the website for those that would like to get caught up, or if you'd like to revisit content from October 2nd, October 9th, or October 23rd. Now, I'd like to shift to an audience poll as we've done before. The question today was developed by the Teaching and Education Subcommittee, which planned the keynote session. You can answer the poll question in the box below the video viewer. And if you haven't done so yet, you'll need to enter your name and email address first to get the poll question to pop up. If you're viewing in full screen mode, you'll have to exit full screen in order to see and answer the question. So the question today is, who or what do you share the planet with? And we're looking for one-word answers here. So exclude words like the or my as you answer the question. Take a minute to enter your answer. It's going to take a moment for the word cloud to display. So go ahead and think on it. Enter your single word answer. Who or what do you share the planet with? And it looks like our results are starting to come in. So we'll pause here for a moment. Life, trees, animals, everything, family, nature, species, biodiversity, everyone, minorities, society, bats. Oh, this is great. Well, it looks like we have a strong preference for life, everything, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for filling out the poll today. This is wonderful. Now, I'd like to introduce Kelly Eskew, who will introduce Professor Wildcat. Kelly Eskew is a clinical professor of business law and ethics at Indiana University's Kelley School of Business. Professor Eskew teaches business and human rights, sustainability law and policy, renewable energy law and policy, and business and poverty alleviation. Take it away, Kelly.
Thank you, Phil. It's a great morning to be with you all. The Climate Teaching and Education track is very pleased to host today's wonderful keynote speaker, Dr. Daniel Wildcat. The Teaching and Education Committee is focused on identifying and addressing education needs around capacity building in both the academy and the community. Talking about what we need all college graduates to understand about climate and what students entering the market as climate experts need to learn. And finally, how we ensure that our necessary transition to carbon neutrality is just. Dr. Daniel Wildcat is a professor of Indigenous and American Indian Studies at Haskell Indian Nations University, where his service as a teacher and an administrator spans 34 years. In 2013, he was the Gordon Russell Visiting Professor of Native American Studies at Dartmouth. He has served as adjunct faculty for the Block School at University of Missouri, Kansas City for the past decades. His accomplishments are too numerous to name here, but I will note that Dr. Wildcat is the author and editor of several books. His most recent, Red Alert, Saving the Planet with Indigenous Knowledge, suggests that current environmental issues will require the exercise of indigenous ingenuity, or indigenuity, and wisdom, if humankind is to reduce the environmental damage underway. We are fortunate to have him with us today, discussing education for resilience, letting Mother Earth teach us. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Wildcat.
Good morning, everyone. Fason, Sailagi, Soyaha, Yuchiha. Greetings, everyone. I hope you're doing well. My name is Dan Wildcat, and I'm a Yuchi scholar and professor at Haskell Indian Nations University. And before I start my presentation, Education for Resilience, Letting Mother Earth Teach Us. I want to thank the organizers of the Midwest Climate Summit and all of the partnering organizations who made this possible. It's a tremendous honor to be able to address you this morning on the topic of education and teaching. So let me begin with the title of the talk, okay? Education for Resilience, Letting Mother Earth Teach Us. We live in the age of the Anthropocene, and I think the biggest challenge we have today is to recognize up front, the reason we call it the Anthropocene is because human conduct has been such, our behavior has been such, that we are changing the basic Earth systems on this planet. It is our behavior, our human conduct, that is causing those changes. And at this point, we have to admit it's not necessarily for the better. Loss of biodiversity, therefore habitats being threatened, acidification of the ocean with the warming of the ocean, all is a kind of a backdrop to climate change. The antidote, I believe, to this anthropocentric climate burning we've been involved in is going to ask us to rethink what it means to teach and to educate. And in a very fundamental sense, I believe the challenge is for the educators to let this planet and its Earth systems teach us how to be more competent, mature human beings. So my short presentation here, I'm going to try to share with you some insights that have come to me, not from anyone with PhDs after their names, not with anyone who's done postdocs at Harvard or any distinguished institutions of higher education, but from elders who have really, I've had the benefit from being at Haskell for the past 35 years to meet, to work with, and have really allowed me to understand more deeply than ever before that the answers that we need to find and the kind of education we need to be doing is an education grounded in the world around us and situated in a way that we begin to recognize our human role in the systems we've created has not been very good for the balance of life on this planet. So I could name a bunch of people, Bill Tallbull, Albert Whitehat, of course, a person who was an academic scholar, Vine Deloria Jr., my mentor and colleague, Dr. Henrietta Mann, and there are so many, Crosland Smith, the late legendary Billy Frank Jr. of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, people who were very wise because they had been paying attention to the world around them. So allow me to try to make a few basic points today that hopefully can guide our discussion afterwards. And around this theme of letting Mother Earth teach us. Number one, if we start paying attention to the Earth systems that we are a part of, I think that their resilience, their ability to respond to often survive and continue in spite of tremendous perturbation by human activity can give us some hope. We suffer today primarily from what I would call an insulated ignorance. Most of us spend time in spaces much like I'm sitting in right now. I've got some windows. I'm inside a nicely insulated home. And we spend more time in these kinds of human engineered, designed environments than most of us do out of doors. So the first challenge, I think, as educators today is we have to rethink of education, how we can do education out of doors and start paying attention to the world around us. We've inculcated a sort of insulated ignorance with the way we live today. I mean this in a fundamentally experiential sense. For those of us who get up in the morning and check what the weather's going to be by our phone applications, or turn on a device and see what weather.com is going to tell us, it's hard to imagine that maybe as little as 3 or 4 generations ago, we had people who were constantly paying attention to the world around them before weather.com, before they had smart devices. And they knew a lot. They gained a lot of insight about how to live well, how to sustain themselves in a particular environment. So I think that one of the ways we overcome this age of the Anthropocene, this human-centered age of Earth history, is to re-engage in relationships with the Earth systems that we are very much a part of. And I think this is something every educator can do and must do. If you're going to talk about land, if you're going to talk about the air, if you're going to talk about the water, if you're going to talk about the ecological systems, the environment that you're a part of, get out of doors and start asking questions about the land. Why do we have certain areas in cities that flood? What led to that? Where does our drinking water come from? Where does our wastewater end up? How do we do we capture rainwater? What do we do in terms of improving our ability to responsibly use water? And I think that that's really a fundamental question. We could ask the same thing about land. And again, these are all related, aren't they? This is the ultimate point. When we get outside our educational institutions, we find out that when we walk outside our doors and we tackle real everyday problems, we seldom ask what discipline we're going to look to help us solve those practical problems of transportation and how we feed ourselves and what decisions, choices we're going to make as consumers. And that's because all of those things are interrelated. And somehow we forget that once we move into the academy or institutions of higher education. As my friend Roger Pawardia, who works at the Earth Sciences Lab, NOAA Earth Sciences Lab in Boulder, Colorado, likes to say, when speaking to educators, we've got to address this fact. The world has problems, and we all work in institutions that have departments. And this is the silo building, the kind of disciplinary blinders that challenge us to really have a deeper understanding of what is going on in the world around us. So people are prone today to talking about the existential threats of climate change. I believe there are existential threats. And I believe the reason we have those existential threats is because we have an experiential crisis we're facing right now. We spend so much time inside environments that are of a human design, and as I said, creation, that we've insulated ourselves into ignorance. So step one, let's take education out of doors. And if we're going to teach about the land, about the air, about the water, about the life systems we're a part of, the best place to do it is to step right outside those human-made environments and start asking those questions about how could we live better here? And there's nothing romantic about that. In fact, it's actually what I call Indigenous Realism. The strength that Indigenous peoples had is having lived in places over long periods of time and intergenerationally handing down knowledge about those places. They had a very deep experiential knowledge of what worked well in those places and what didn't. So let's take education out of doors and see what the planet itself can teach us about how to be more competent, mature human beings. I want to make a quick comment about some of the challenges we face when we do that. I think with any education, again, most of you, I think, are probably in post-secondary colleges and universities, but for you K through 12 teachers, and I guess I should say this even for all educators, one of the challenges we have with climate change is fighting, what even some clinical psychologists now are identifying as climate anxiety. A real condition where we have young people today who are sometimes paralyzed about their thoughts about the future and what their future will look like in the face of climate change. And so I think it's very, very important that we be sensitive to this and we be thinking about how we always present. I like Paulo Freire's introduction in his follow-up book to Pedagogy of the Oppressed, the Pedagogy of Hope, where he talks about hope as being an ontological condition, how we must have hope, even when we're facing very real problems that we're not going to underestimate or sugarcoat. But you have to have this opportunity to talk about solutions, things we can do. And I think once we step outside our human-built environment, we get a secondary benefit of that, and that is that, when you're outside long enough, you begin to really recognize sometimes how small we are in this great cosmos that we are a part of. And so how do we talk about hope? How do we talk about giving students hope in a world where often what psychologists call our bandwidth is totally consumed with a number of crises, economic crisis, a virus pandemic crisis, a governmental crisis, an education crisis, a justice crisis, and now you're going to tell me I've got to think about a climate crisis too? It is really easy to overwhelm ourselves and certainly students that we might work with these multiple levels of crises. And there's just only so much, that we have only so much bandwidth where we can really deal with these things. So let's be mindful of that in whatever we do. Here's what I think we should consider. Let's think about a fundamental reframing a paradigm shift, if you will, of how we discuss the issue of climate change. And I believe it's one that allows us to tie all these different threads together. The first one is we've got to disabuse ourselves in this anthropocentric world that, one, it's all about us, and two, that the balance of creation, the parts of the physical and natural world we had no hand in shaping, that those are not resources. But as many indigenous peoples honor the plants, the animals, the land, the air, and the water, that we live among relatives. Think of that shift, what that would mean. And by the way, that's much more consistent with the modern convergent science that many of us talk about today, with the transdisciplinary science we need. We know that we are all in complex relations and relationships. It's all about relationships. And climate change is such a marvelous example of that. You know, we often refer to these as wicked problems because of their complexity. We need a paradigm that understands that and works with that as a strength from the get-go. So let's change our paradigm from thinking that we live in a world full of relatives to one where we live in a world where we live with resources to one where we live with relatives. That would be an incredible step forward. If we do that, then we can counterbalance something we're surrounded with today everywhere we look. And that's the notion that, by God, government exists to protect my inalienable rights. Well, certainly that is a role that government plays. But when you look at indigenous traditions of governance, there's a counterbalance to rights, because individual rights can become hollow very quickly if there's not something equivalent to what I have called inalienable responsibilities. Note the complementarity to the first point. When you live among resources, all you do is argue about whose right it is to use it. When you live among relatives, you have to ask yourself, what's my responsibility to those relatives? Well, right now, humankind's been behaving pretty badly with our other than human relatives on this planet. Let's move from a worldview full of resources to one full of relatives. Let's counterbalance inalienable rights with inalienable responsibilities. And if we do that, I think we can shift the discussion with sustainability, which gets really, unfortunately, overburdened with carrying all of this baggage of the past. You know, sustaining what? What are we about? Almost every corporation on the planet now has a sustainability platform, and some of the industries that are most damaging to the planet, they have sustainability platforms too. So what are you trying to sustain? I think what we should talk about is resilience. And I know those of you that come from, social sciences, we think of resilience as being able to respond, to adapt, to come back. I would say we need to think about something called resilience plus. In other words, we just don't want to, when we go through all these difficulties in our hands, kind of go back to where we were, not be resilient in that way. What we're really about is let's try to create something more enriching to life on the planet. So what I've said is a model of resilience plus would embrace what can we do in our activities, in our work, in our research to start building models of what systems of life enhancement look like. I don't know about progress anymore. That seems to be a very anthropocentric term. But I do know that I am definitely for building, creating, thinking systems of life enhancement, not just my own human life, but all of that life, all of those relatives I share this planet with. Again, I don't think there's anything romantic about that. I call this Indigenous Realism. And as a final point, let's go back to what I said about let's start where we live. Let's get students out of doors. Let's do project-based learning. Let's do hands-on learning. Let's identify real challenges we have and work with our students to start figuring out how to understand those, how to analyze those, how to model different systems and make changes. And this is what I'll close with. If we do this, here's the good news. We won't have to live in a world full of fear. We have post 9/11 a whole new branch of government or a whole new agency, Department of Homeland Security. People talk about food security. People talk about housing security. What are we afraid of? Secure from what? From whom? If we can take these steps, let's move from a world full of resources to relatives, from a preoccupation with rights to counterbalancing with responsibilities, with a movement away from just simple questions of sustainability to resilience plus, how we build something better, not just restore back to something we had before, but make something better, more beautiful, more life enhancing. Then I guess what my hope is that my granddaughter will not need a Department of Homeland Security, but instead what we can all work on is let's try to foster a sense of what it would mean to develop homeland maturity. That's what the planet needs right now, homeland maturity, human beings who are thinking about something other than themselves, and human beings who are going to let our mother, Earth, this planet, teach us how to be more competent, mature human beings. That's not romanticism, that's Indigenous realism. Thank you very much.
Dr. Wildcat, thank you. What a wonderful, optimistic message. And this seems like a really wonderful day to hear that message. So I appreciate you. We have a few questions and a little bit of time. So let me start with the first. You mentioned how those of us in academia so often work in silos, and that this is a challenge as we navigate the world around us. So what can those of us who teach learn or take from that as we design curricula and courses for our students?
Well, I think that here's what we need to do within our institutions. We need to make sure that we're having a talk with our upper administration and giving some real incentive for people to be able to work cross disciplines in interdisciplinary fashions. I think that I've been a dean, I've been an academic vice president, so I know the concerns about budgets, and we've got limited budgets, but we have very little incentive for people to do those, to cross those boundaries. I would love to, if I was going to have a course about climate resilience, I would want to talk to the dean of the business school, the dean of the Booter School of Social Welfare, whoever's in charge of the environmental science program, and say, hey, we want a commitment that next year we get one FTE across faculty to be team teaching about the issue of climate change and how we can respond to it. Because when you think about it, you've got business, economic concerns, you certainly have social concerns, issues, and obviously the environment. So why not have all of those three together in one course and letting students see how those things are interrelated?
And really letting the experts on each of our 3 Ps and our triple bottom line and our people, planet, profit contribute.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
So how can we shift our thinking from teaching about the planet and Earth systems to learning from them, letting Mother Earth teach us, as you said? Why is this shift so important?
Yeah, I think it's important again because it gives really, I think, students a deeper appreciation and a real sense that the topics we're talking about aren't esoteric, aren't abstract, but really relate to where they live, where they go to school, and right there on the ground in the community where they are. You know, I think this is a lost opportunity. Think of what we could do, and I understand there has been some talk about creating a climate youth corps with if we have, who knows, a Biden administration. That's something that's been floated. But that would be a marvelous idea of getting young people on the ground in communities addressing the practical problems that they're facing. And I think that's getting out of doors. That's how you get a better sense, I think, of what those problems are in a very practical and experiential sense. That's what we need, that reconnection, that this isn't abstract. You don't necessarily, I'm glad we have climate modelers, but there's a lot that you can do right there on the ground in your community.
Oh, I love that answer. Question from David. How can we use methods like talking and listening to each other, which seem to be more present in Indigenous cultures, to counteract the current polarization of climate issues?
Boy, I tell you, I wish I had the answer to that. I don't think it's going to be hard work, for one thing. I think we've got to all find those spaces, and frankly, our colleges and universities are a good place to model this. You know, some do a better job than others, but I think that you put your finger on really the nature of the crisis we have today is that we don't spend enough time discussing issues with people that disagree with us fundamentally. We don't have very many models of how to do that respectfully, how to not let those kinds of things devolve into personal attacks. And so I think there's a real opportunity here for us to create those public spaces where we can do that. Use your public library, you know, use the League of Women Voters, use existing organizations and talk to them and go and say, hey, we'd like to have a forum. And this forum is going to be one where we're going to have difficult discussions. Most importantly, we've got to have people model how you can have, I guess, a civil discussion and yet possibly vehemently disagree about something. And that is a part of our governance traditions. in many indigenous communities, we had ways of sitting down and really having those very difficult discussions. We need to start doing that now. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard work.
Thank you for that answer. I don't want to cut off our conversation, but you're going to be part of the next panel. But let's squeeze in one more question if we can. Do you have any specific strategies for promoting resilience plus mindsets and actions? Local, state, national, how do we engage our communities, town and gown, in these kinds of initiatives?
Yeah,
just a small question.
No, a small one. But let me give an example. Okay, so here's what I think. Here's where the opportunities are to kind of break that town and gown division. I think if you don't have in your university very active community, non-gown, the town, folk advisory boards, a place for them to come and meet with your faculty, with leadership, then you're missing the boat, because they can be the greatest resource in helping us identify the problems that need to be addressed. And so you don't have to go looking for problems. They're right out your door in your community. And I think this is breaking down that notion that somehow, we're up here in the Ivy Tower, and here's the town folk, and we're in this other sphere of intellectual activity and such, and to really come down out of that tower and start inviting town folk, community leaders, to be involved in curriculum design, to be involved in the kinds of topics that you should be addressing. I think this is really a great opportunity to challenge that ancient division between town and gown.
And maybe also to acknowledge our responsibilities to one another.
Absolutely. That's what it's ultimately about, So we're thinking right now of some garden projects on the Haskell campus. And one of the things I think that we're going to move towards is inviting community gardeners or people who have rental properties. Maybe they don't have a yard to garden in, to come join us in our gardening activities. Wouldn't that be awesome? So yes, we've got to be better relatives to one another.
That's a wonderful note to end this portion of our morning on. Again, Dr. Wildcat will be part of the Teaching and Education track panel coming up. But for now, thank you, Dr. Wildcat, and I'll turn it back over to Phil.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Professor Wildcat, what perfect remarks for the moment that we're in today, this week, this year. I'm really, really looking forward to, once we get the video posted, returning to listen to those remarks again. I just am very inspired today. So everyone, please join me in thanking Professor Wildcat for the fantastic keynote from where you sit. As we've shared from the beginning of this series, the express intent of our collaboration is to expand climate knowledge, accelerate climate action, and catalyze new partnerships. And as we looked ahead to the final session on November 20th, we'd like to begin identifying some of the preliminary impacts of the fall series, including new connections that you've made, resources you've discovered, new ideas that the series has spurred, etc. So we've posted a link to a single question survey. It's very, very short on the event landing page that's just above the video viewer. And we invite you, we ask you, please take 1 minute, 2 minutes to fill it out today or by early next week at the latest to share feedback on how the Climate Summit has impacted you to date. I have a couple of additional housekeeping items before we shift to the workshops. As we've done before, we want to encourage you to keep using social media throughout and tag your posts with hashtag Midwest Climate Summit. Our next and last session is taking place Friday, November 20th, 2 weeks from today, 10 a.m. to 12:15 p.m. Central. The keynote speaker is former New York Times climate reporter Justin Gillis, and his talk will focus on communicating the crisis. Should we just change the subject? Please be sure to join us as we wrap up the fall series, as we reflect on our discussions throughout the fall, and as we look ahead to the spring summit. And note that the format of the last session is inverted. We're starting with workshops, we'll end with the keynote, and then we'll end with a wrap up, 12 to 12:15. I also want to remind everyone that the Student Systems Conference is taking place today, this afternoon, from 1 to 3:30 p.m. Central. So if you're a student or you're someone who works with students, we really strongly encourage you to participate. Please also be sure to check out the Climate Stories contest. Again, as a reminder, the top 3 winners in each of the submission categories will receive cash awards up to $1,500. Students throughout the Midwest are eligible to participate, and you can find details on the event website. Okay, now it's time to transition to the workshops. The links to access the workshops are on the landing page below the video viewer. As with the last couple of weeks, the password for all the workshops is Climate20, all lowercase, no spaces, and 20, so Climate20. We'll go ahead and display that password on the slides that we'll begin playing momentarily as well, if you didn't capture that. So thank you again to Dr. Wildcat for the phenomenal keynote. Thank you for being with us this morning, and enjoy the workshops.